This is a 3D version of one of the demons that Bruegel painted about 400 years ago. For several hundred years, no one seemed to have noticed something about this little demon, until in the 21st century, Tine Meganck discovered something remarkable. Welcome back. This is part 3 of 3 episodes called 3 books about the mysterious painter Pieter Bruegel the Elder. You might remember from the previous episodes that I'm on a little quest to learn more about Bruegel and to improve my observation skills as a psychologist. I shared with you an observation technique that was based upon 4 simple questions. In part 1, Manfred Zellick helped us to better focus on the details when looking at the paintings of Bruegel. And in part 2, we were looking for meaning in the paintings of Bruegel, and we talked with Jürgen Müller, who brought a political perspective on this painter. In this episode, we are going to talk to Tine Meganck, who wrote a fascinating book about one particular painting of Bruegel. I'm going to ask her all 4 questions of the observation technique, and in her answers, she will reveal some remarkable insights. We are talking about this famous painting with the mysterious name The Fall of the Rebel Angels. We read in the introduction of Tine's book that this book is one book about one painting that opens like a box filled with unexpected things. That phrase describes perfectly what you can expect when you want to read this book. We went together to the Museum of Fine Arts in Brussels, and we meet in front of this wonderful painting. Hi, Tine.
Hello, Lieven.
Thank you so much for welcoming us here in the beautiful Museum of Fine Arts in Brussels.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. I read several books about Bruegel, and I fell in love immediately, actually, with your book, honestly. It's my favorite painting. And when I saw the cover of your book, I thought, oh, somebody especially wrote a book about this one. So I bought it right away, and I really loved reading it.
Thank you.
Now, I'm a psychologist, and I often use paintings of Bosch and Bruegel to train a bit my observation skills. It's one way to train it. Mm-hmm. And I have 4 questions for you I would like to ask, because with Bruegel and Bosch we normally see way more. We can see way more than the image is showing right away. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to fire some questions on you and see what you come up to. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's try.
All right, first very short question. What is it actually that we see here?
Might be a short question, but it's not as short, and there's no short answer. What we see is a mixture of creatures. I think you would mostly see angels first, one central angel who is St. Michael, and then a multitude of hybrid devilish creatures. That's what you see. That's not yet the story.
Indeed, this is not yet the story, because we learn from Tine's book that this painting has many layers to it. One part of the mystery goes back to 1846, when the Royal Museum purchased the painting. They thought they bought a painting of Pieter Bruegel II, so the son of Pieter Bruegel the Elder. Several years later, the painting then was wrongly attributed to Jeroen Bosch. That is not surprising, because although Jeroen Bosch was from an earlier generation of painters, Bruegel was very much influenced by his style. But then in 1898, so more than 50 years after they purchased the painting, they discovered the signature and the date of the painting. It said MDLX11/Bruegel, meaning that it was Pieter Bruegel the Elder who signed this painting in 1562. The signature was hidden for many years behind the frame of the painting on the lower left corner. But next to this technical and historical information, Tine has a way more compelling story. And now we come to the second question already. So, what is actually going on here?
There is a fight. A fight is going on, and you see this white light above, which is the heavenly skies. This is a scene situated in heaven, before even man was created, at times when there was only angels. And what we see is the moment, so-called first moment of evil, when one of these splendid angels, Lucifer, the carrier of light, stands up against God, says, I think I'm good enough, I don't even need God. And he's punished for that by the archangel Michael, centrally depicted in his golden armor. And when he's cast out of the heavens, he's cast out of the heavens with his followers, with his cohorts. And that's this multitude of figures we see falling out of the sky. So it's a fight to cast the first moment of evil, incarnation of evil, out of heaven.
Okay, so it's St. Michael and his army fighting an army of demons.
Yes.
There are very few sources existing about Pieter Bruegel the Elder. That's why we don't know why he wanted to paint 400 years ago a scene that, according to tradition, took place even before mankind existed. And we can also ask ourselves, why did he want to paint what is called the punishment for the first act of evil? We only see that he paints the archangel Michael right in the middle of the painting, and that this archangel is way older than Christianity. But before we talk a bit more about that, let's listen to what Tine has to say more about the demons in the painting. It brings me to the third question, what else is going on in this picture actually?
There is indeed much more going on. So when we look closer, I think we see first Bosch. And this raises questions as of why Bruegel would try to emulate here the devils of Bosch. Then, if you look even closer, and that was for me especially the level where I departed from the current interpretations when I started my research, I even saw hybrid creatures different from Bosch. So he's inspired by Bosch, but Bruegel lives in the next generation, which is a different moment in time.
And that brings us actually at the fourth level of questions like, what is the context here that made the changes actually?
Yeah, so you immediately, I think, come to that question, and for me especially, in my type of research, I emphasize the importance of specific contexts, because of course Bruegel is a painter who leaves many questions open and can be is open for various interpretations, but as an art historian, we still, I think, have the obligation to think site-specifically. If you think Bosch had died in 1516, this painting is painted about 50 years later. What changes between Bosch and Bruegel in terms especially of the larger, popular, global culture, that is the impact of the discovery of the New World.
So the impact of the New World, or as some call it, the discovery of the Americas. As we all know, the official date for the discovery of the Americas was 1492 by Christopher Columbus. And now, in the time of Bruegel, there is an increasing impact of this New World on the European continent. There is, for example, totally new information that is reaching Europe. There are drawings depicting indigenous people from the Americas, and there were plants and animals that were never seen before. And there are drawings of all these new discoveries that are becoming available on the European continent. And Antwerp, the place where Bruegel originally lived, had famous printing houses. One of them is the publishing house of Plantin, where many of these original drawings were printed. Now we live in a digital age, and when we go somewhere in the world and make pictures with our smartphones, our family back home can almost see instantly what we see, if we wish to. In those days the pattern was the same. However, the information was spread much slower and was not available to everyone. So what Tine does in her research is not just looking at the painting of Bruegel to the monstrous creatures and conclude that he just copied Jeroen Bosch. Or she does not give some kind of philosophical or very creative conclusion about these demons. Instead, Tine makes a link between the discovery of the New World and some of the features of the demons in the painting. And that is a unique finding. that was overlooked for more than 400 years. To me, this is a beautiful example of a great observation skill. What Tine does is connecting seemingly unrelated information in a very meaningful and convincing way. This is not an obvious thing to do. And this shows again why context really matters when we are observing something. With this, Tine sheds a totally new light on this mysterious painter. For example, it shows to which kind of information this painter had access to and how information was spread during the Renaissance period. Let's listen how Tine explains it.
And what we know is from about the mid-16th century, which is really the moment Bruegel enters his career, first in Antwerp and in Brussels. That's the moment when images, also printed images in major publishing houses, for example in the house of Planten in Antwerp, start flooding really the market and become very popular. So then, with both this context in mind, but still mainly using the eyes, one starts to see elements that look very exotic. And so then I can zoom in on a few of these devilish creatures in which Bruegel incorporates elements not just of nature but specifically of exotic nature.
I like the one with the red there.
Yeah, this is kind of a floral trunk. Always, the whole visual analysis demands some time. So what Bruegel is doing is incorporating elements that if you look well and you know the culture of the time, for example, this falling angel, you still see the soft face, you still see the soft hair of the angel, but the body is no longer this white alp, but is a hybrid of, as I said, of maybe floral trunk, but then his harness, remember it's a fight, it's a battle, his harness is the armor of an armadillo, and an armadillo is one of those animals that arrive mid-16th century with travelers, with merchants in Europe, especially because, of course, this hard armor could be preserved. And there is this culture that develops not only of knowledge but also of collecting rare and unusual things. The more monstrous, the more people were intrigued by them. So if you see the way Bruegel kind of builds this armor up and you compare it with images of armadillos, then it's clear that he makes reference to this image, which we can then show really became an icon of the Americas. There are others, because once one starts to trace that Bruegel merged this eternal story of good and evil with something, a big question about the world he was living in. What is happening? A world opens up to a whole new reality. How do we situate that? What is it? I mean, we cannot deny he integrates them within a devilish structure with fascination, but also evoking certainly a certain fear of the unknown and of the explosion of knowledge and what as humans to do with this. Also, we should not forget that, of course, once again, the monstrous is within European and global culture from the very beginning, but usually is in something imaginary, evoking the unknown. And here, things come in that seem to be real, whereas a mermaid, a unicorn, has never been real. Is this thing real or not? And you have to make sense of that. So, an armadillo. Maybe the fish up there is the blowfish, the kind of Pacific, also unknown in Europe before the real 16th century when the world was going into discovery.
And that is the Lord of Flies, I think you mentioned.
Yes,
right?
The thing is with Bruegel, as I already said, we try to make sense of things because it helps us to put the painting within its context. That being said, there always remain elements which are very difficult to explain, and that's my best explanation because, of course, so many people, it's, first of all, he's bound, his hands are bound, which often also you see it on the Dole Griet, was a proverb that the devil, you have to bind the hands or you have to bind the devil on a cushion, and he has long ears, and there's all these flies. So Beelzebub was the Lord of the Flies, the first helper of Lucifer. So it's one of the hypotheses for me that that's Beelzebub.
So Tine shows that many demons in the painting of Bruegel had features from animals that were existing in the Americas, and that Bruegel had access to this information. And then there is the story of the Lord of the Flies and many other surprising findings. But there is even more. Remember that Tine started by saying that the story that is depicted in this painting took place before mankind. But then there is another layer hiding in this picture. Just like we already saw with the previous two books about Bruegel in episode 1 and episode 2, Bruegel is an artist that puts different layers of meaning in his work. And it is as if he leaves it to us, the viewers, to find them. And of course, Tine will help us to find yet another layer in this wonderful painting.
I've told the story a little bit easily by saying this is the fall of the rebel angels. But what Bruegel really does is even something more complex, more universal about this presence of evil in the world. It's not only the beginning of times.
It's also the end of times.
It's also the end of times, because there appears, when you look longer, this huge falling
seven-headed dragon
of the apocalypse, which is the end of times.
Yes.
So he conflates two stories.
No, I was very intrigued by the fact when you said if you look longer, then you could discover the seven-headed demon also. Eh?
Yeah.
I never saw it in it. I saw always this part of this big monster, but you can even find the seven heads actually.
Yeah.
But where are the seven heads? How would you count them?
This is, if you want, the navel of the hairy monster with two claws here.
Yeah.
And then underneath here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And these ones hang upside down, so this you can still see the crown.
So Bruegel is actually showing different time zones in the same picture. He shows the beginning of time and he shows the end of time, when the archangel Michael is fighting the seven-headed demon of the apocalypse. And that makes absolutely sense, because the archangel is known to all three monotheistic religions. So Judaism, Christianity and Islam mention him in their sacred books. One example is the very old text that is outside of the canonic Bible, the so-called Greek Apocalypse of Moses, that was written somewhere between the 3rd and the 5th century AD. In this text, the archangel Michael is mentioned in the story of Adam and Eve, so at the beginning of time. But we also know that he is often depicted with a balance in his hands, which refers to his role on Judgment Day, so at the end of times, when he weighs the souls and helps to decide who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. So the archangel is like a kind of time traveler. He shows up everywhere. Is it fair to say that then he wants to show like the evil has been there from the beginning till the end? It's always going to be existing? Is that what he tries to say?
What he tries to say, I think, I would maybe more use words evokes. He evokes because he never fixes anything, but he does evoke a presence of evil and how to deal with it and how to battle evil from the beginning to the end of times, and then intermerged with that specific moment where he is living. Eh?
All right.
That being said, because it's a very heavy question you're asking, and that's also very interesting, always, I think, maybe also different than Bosch. To come back to that question about evil in the world, yes, but he always, in the same time, opens it up to something joyful and pleasurable. I mean, in the end, he's still making art, and he makes also a reflection about beauty and about fascination of nature and art. And he does this, of course, in such a wonderful way, because he's always almost creating his painted cabinet of curiosities in which we can endlessly wonder. And then, of course, with this reflection on the background of how do we deal with it, but it's always both.
Oh. Thank you very, very much. That was super interesting.
Pleasure.
After we talked about the fall of the rebel angels, we took the time to talk a bit about her other books. And I shared with her a very personal story about the painting The Fall of the Rebel Angels. It is a personal story, one that she was very surprised about. But first, her other books. The study of a painter or a painting from the past looks to me sometimes like the work of a detective at a crime scene. They try to reconstruct what happened by looking at the facts that are laying in front of them. And they search for witnesses that might have seen something. To me, some of the work in art history has a very similar approach. One person that could reveal a bit more about Bruegel is a man called Abraham Ortelius, who was also mentioned in the previous episode by Jürgen Müller. Ortelius was a friend of Bruegel and he possessed some kind of paper version of Facebook. During his many travels across Europe, he asked his friends to write poems and make drawings in his little notebook, which he called Album Amicorum. In this Facebook from centuries ago, he also wrote a poem to his friend Pieter Bruegel the Elder. Tine made her dissertation in Princeton about Ortelius and his network of friends. So Tine, every time I have a guest on Bold Books and Bones, I ask them what kind of book would they recommend. I see you brought some books.
I brought books, but I'm not not necessary to make publicity of my own work, but indeed I wrote a few other books that might interest readers.
Okay.
One of them is entitled Erudite Eyes. That's a book about the network of Abraham Ortelius, and this is this cartographer.
Yes.
This goes back to my PhD dissertation, which I wrote in Princeton University. So it is, to some extent, an academic work. But I hope readers would see that also in The Fall of the Rebel Angels book. I try to write in an accessible, narrative way.
Absolutely accessible.
And in particular, the book talks about interactions of learned people and artists, and how erudition and learning and art making in this world synergizes, often through friendships. The image on the cover, of course, Ortelius lives much longer. In fact, Bruegel is only the beginning of the career of Ortelius. Ortelius lives almost to the end of the 16th century. So we go into many other friendships. And the man on the cover of the book is Joris Hoefnagel, also an extremely fascinating figure.
Perfect.
But that's one book.
But you also brought your latest book, I see.
Yes, and unfortunately, it's not unfortunately, but it's in the Dutch version.
No,
but
it's fine.
It has appeared in 4 languages, and that's a book we set up within the museum after the results I obtained through this kind of close viewing method for The Fall of the Rebel Angels. I was asked to write or to do a similar study on the census of Bethlehem.
Yes.
But look how different these two works are. So at the beginning I was like, whew, I have to contextualize a very different world. And one of the main indicators, of course, of that painting is that it's winter, and another element is that it's a lot about paying and taxation. So we decided that whereas in The Fall of the Rebel Angels I had written a monograph myself, that here it would be a dialogue with historians to tackle complex issues such as climate history, history of taxation, interaction city, countryside. And so this is, it has 2 essays. My big essay on the census of Bethlehem, a smaller essay by Sabine van Sprang, who was curator here, is now director of the Academia Belgica, but on the smaller winter landscape, and then a whole set of historians who, in fact, have informed us to make sense of these 2 winter paintings.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Tine, I also have a little story about this painting actually, because as I said in the beginning, it's my favorite one. I like the museum very much, so I come here every year, and I often just talk to strangers if I see them having interest for a painting of Bruegel or of Bosch. And one day I was here, and it was not hanging here; it was hanging in another room. Mm-hmm. And there was a very nice lady standing pretty close to the painting, and there was a gentleman standing on my left with a cap, and I didn't know who he was. And the lady suddenly asked the question, is this a painting of Bruegel or is it one of Bosch? Mm-hmm. And I felt that's such a good question. So I said to the lady, well, that is such a good question, ma'am. I totally didn't know who she was. And I started to talk about both painters and how Bruegel most probably was influenced by Bosch and so on. And the gentleman next to me on my left also said something, asked me something. He said, by the way, is it from the Apocalypse? But at that time I didn't know the answer to that question. I only learned from you now. And then there were two strong gentlemen standing there, and there was a young couple. But I didn't see the full picture. So at a certain moment I say, well, if you're interested in the paintings of Bosch, there are a few very beautiful Bosch paintings here, so why don't we have a look? So we went over there, but then the museum said we're going to close. So we had to leave. So I said to the people, I'm very sorry, they are announcing that the museum is closing, we have to leave. Okay, thank you, and bye-bye. But while I was walking out, I was thinking, the gentleman on my left, who was that? That voice. I thought I recognized that voice. So I was almost out of the museum, and there were a lot of people. I looked at my back. I saw the gentleman looking in my eyes. It was David Bowie.
Wow.
And he smiled, and he put down his cap because there were so many people there. So I went to the young gentleman there, the young couple, and I said to the young couple, "Excuse me, is that Mr. Bowie?" He said, "Yeah, it's my dad. He loved your stories." He said.
That's wonderful.
It's really wonderful.
I think it's one of the greatest artists of pop history of the times I've known.
He watched his painting.
But sorry, I'm jealous. I wish it had been me.
And I was out, and then he went into a dark van or something, and then he left. And I saw them. It must be more than 10 years ago or something. And I was not a Bowie fan at all, so a friend of mine said, yeah, but because there's a concert here and probably that's... So, talking about observation skills, standing right beside David Bowie and talking to him and not recognizing it was him, now you know why I need to urgently improve my observation skills. Now, if you like this episode and you want to encourage me and support me, then may I kindly ask you to subscribe to my channel and push that bell so you stay updated on the next episodes of Bold Books and Bolds. Hope to see you soon. Bye.